My name's Paul Vivian, and I'm an artist based in Southampton. The exhibition's called Those Who Look Out and Those Who Look Back. Well, my inspiration came from a quote by an early 19th century oceanographer called R.M. Schneider, who basically said, it's a quote, I'll paraphrase it, which was that the sea doesn't know that you are there, basically. And you take it as it is, or it takes you. And that kind of resonated. And I started to think about the idea of the coast and obviously the history of God's House Tower in relationship to that. And I wanted in some way to bring the sea to God's House Tower. And part of my work is very much about objects hosting ideas. So a lot of what I do tends to look like merchandise, or can look like that. And so I began from that sort of, I suppose, position of trying to think about how these objects could be introduced to the space and in some ways bring the sea in. So there was a lot of ideas originally which were around, I started researching things like incantations and magic spells and objects that operated in that way. And then charms, basically, that would be bought by sailors from effectively witches or wise women at coastal towns, and then taken out to sea to ensure that there was, that the weather was good and all those sort of things. And I started to look at that, and then began to think about, I suppose, objects of the 21st and 20th century and how those could inform the exhibition. So the work is made up of these heads, which are called bosun heads, and they were made in the northwest, I think it was, sort of in the early part of the 20th century, and they were the sort of things that you would have, they're decoration around the house. But they would also talk about an idea of a globalized world, but it might be a globalized world that you've never experienced. So they would be images of particular kind of characters, and the one that is in the show is actually a lifeboatman. So I've repeated this lifeboatman's head 30 times, which is throughout the space. And the rest of the work is printed towels. So I've worked with towels before, and it's this idea of the kind of recreation, and then an image which is quite startling, or an idea that's quite startling. So one of the things that you'll see in the show is this incredibly kind of dynamic rough sea, which is printed on a towel which lies on the floor. And then there is an image of water droplets which are magnified. And then there is an image of a pebble which is taken from Highcliffe, which is on the coast near Southampton, and working with that. But it sort of hangs in the air like some kind of meteorite, that's kind of floating in. So in some ways they almost are these things which are very familiar to us, but they also carry with them these very kind of perhaps significant ideas. Maybe the bosun's heads are very melancholic, and also the fact that they emerge from the floor of the space is rather like people lost at sea, effectively. So that was my contribution, I suppose. But the way that it works with Laura's work is there is this toing and froing of a kind of humour and melancholy, I think, to the exhibition, which I think works really well in terms of changing the nature of the space, kind of making a perhaps both a heavy and a light-hearted comment on this idea of the sea and our relationship to it. The fact that we're keeping it at bay, you can see out of the windows a kind of artificial coast, obviously, and then this sense that there's a sense of it creeping towards us as well, with that. So the other thing as well, I suppose, is to do with ideas around the Pethers paintings, which is so when the proposal was accepted, that was something that we were introduced to, and a discussion around the idea of the romantic landscape and the romantic image. And I think yeah, I'm pretty sure that the work is a critique of that. It's not here to complement it. It's something that I feel, whilst I admire that work and I have interest in it, I also want to challenge it as well, because it has this idea of, as I said about the R.M. Schneider quote, is this idea of the sea being something that can be contained and that can be domesticated in a way. And I wanted to bring it back to an idea about the sea which was far more challenging and far more frightening, perhaps.